Hey VC, it's Gordon at I Dig Vinyl here, back with another video moving through the 1980s, and today I find myself at the Orwellian year 1984. 1984, I am 8 years old, 7 years old and 8 years old, and again fairly blissfully unaware of the world around, politically, socially, etc. as I'm heading into primary 4, primary 3 in school. 1984 is the year that the miners' strike in the United Kingdom is raging on. It rages throughout, I think, most of the year, perhaps even into the next year. It's part of the kind of inevitable fallout from Margaret Thatcher's policies around unprofitable industry. Mining communities, it was not just about jobs, about identity, survival, and that wider clash between organised labour and that Tory government shaped the whole mood of Britain. I think I can vaguely remember on the TV, on the news, kind of clips from various picket points and Arthur Scargill's name becoming pretty well spoken about. So vague memories of that in the background. For me, I was, as I said, quite unaware in general terms, very busy with Star Wars, very busy with He-Man, stuff like that. I think my cousin possibly got himself a Spectrum 48K at that time, so Chucky Egg, Horace Goes Skiing, that's the kind of thing that's going on. Across the Atlantic, I can remember the LA Olympics in 1984. There was glamour, there was colour, there was jetpacks. There's also a Cold War absence. America weren't at the 1980 Olympics. No Soviet countries were involved in the 1984 ones. I can remember Carl Lewis winning the 100 metres, thinking, wow, what a superhuman athlete we're looking at here, golden boy of the games. And close to home, this is the year that 1984, where Daley Thompson wins the decathlon for Great Britain. And again, I thought I was watching this kind of superhuman character from another planet. Such was it sort of celebrated, and of course became a computer game for us all to buy and try to become Daley's decathlon. So at home, I was all into Star Wars, He-Man. In cinemas, the biggest box office hit is Beverly Hills Cop. Eddie Murphy becomes a global superstar. Funnily enough, in the charts, the biggest selling album of this particular year is Lionel Richie and his Can't Slow Down. Not an album that I've heard or intend to hear anytime soon. So my albums that I'm going to show today are quite diverse, probably kind of sum up the mood of the 1984, probably, in terms of them being a wee bit underground, and also I've picked some albums from different bits in the world just to show for a wee change. So without further ado, here I go. First album is an artist that I've grown to really enjoy recently, and this is Thomas Mapfumo and the Blacks Unlimited with their album Mabasa, which was released in that particular year and was a big hit, I think, in Zimbabwe at the time. Not such a big hit over in the United Kingdom. Don't think it was a particularly big hit in America. But I'm interested in Thomas Mapfumo because of the sort of journey with Zimbabwean music all the way through the 70s. He was an absolute superstar in Zimbabwe, a key player in the rise of the chimurenga music, which I'm interested in. Chimurenga literally means, I think is it power and struggle? Let me check my note here. Fight or struggle. And it's really key to kind of musically criticising the Rhodesian government, the colonial government of the 70s. So chimurenga music, it fuses traditional Zimbabwean instruments with Western instruments like guitar and so on, and it's a really interesting sound altogether. And Thomas Mapfumo was at the forefront of it all through the 70s, and this one is interesting to me because he became a kind of voice of a criticism of the Robert Mugabe government that had replaced the old sort of colonial government in 1980. So what happened was it wasn't quite as good as they maybe thought it was going to be, and this album was kind of openly critical of the Zimbabwean government under Mugabe, which got him into all sorts of trouble. The album's got criticisms of post-colonial government, talks about work or lack of it, lack of money, the idea of being in self-exile. Thomas Mapfumo actually literally went into exile about 15 years later, goes off to live in America, and didn't come back until the fall of the Mugabe regime much later on. So I think it's an interesting one. It's kind of hypnotic, rolling grooves, quite chilled out, to be honest. But interestingly, you can see the translations on the back, which perhaps don't really convey the message as much as it certainly would be in the Shona that I think he's singing in. But very critical of Mugabe, quite openly so. And he went on a tour in 1984, including places like London, and he was openly critical of that government. When he got back, he talked about being harassed quite a bit, and eventually he leaves Zimbabwe for a while. But his work through the 70s is brilliant. Blacks Unlimited, Hallelujah, Chicken Run Band right at the start of the 70s, absolutely cracking. So this is his 1984 album Mabasa meaning work. And it's a good one to kick off with. Very, very different to this one, which is the Explorers, with their only album as a band, and it's just the self-titled The Explorers. In case you don't know, the Explorers kind of formed out of Roxy Music. This is when Phil Manzanera and Andy Mackay basically go off on their own. I guess actually what's happening is Brian Ferry's going off on his own. Quite smooth, sophisticated, pretty catchy at times. It's a great song, a couple of cracking songs right at the start. The song Lorelei is really, really catchy, really upbeat tune. I like it a lot. Kind of interesting sort of synth poppy, I guess, a bit new wavy, I suppose. Is that such a thing? Didn't get the commercial results that they obviously would have been looking for. I think it's quite an interesting album, very much, I guess, what I used to associate 1980s music as being. It's quite glam at times, a bit new wavy, quite poppy. It's probably lacking something, and that something, I guess, is Brian Ferry. But yeah, it's an interesting listen. I picked it up in a charity shop a while ago for a few pounds, and yeah, I quite enjoy it. So very different, wee contrast to Thomas Mapfumo. This one's closer to home, it's the Explorers. Now, okay, another cracking indie album. Quite distinct, quite sort of unique sound, I would say. It's the Cocteau Twins with their album Treasure. I don't have many albums in my collection quite like the Cocteau Twins, and I suppose how many artists are all that like the Cocteau Twins. Brilliant, ethereal vocals. I believe a lot of them are kind of improvised in the studio. I guess Kate Bush would be a bit of a kind of touchstone. But yeah, very sort of floaty, cathedral-like sound. I don't know how to describe it. If you like the Cocteau Twins, you know what I'm talking about. 4AD, brilliant, influential band, straight out of Scotland. Not many bands like it at the time. I've been kind of charting through music of the 80s, and I haven't found anything that was very much like them before them, and I don't think there's too much like them afterwards. I can trace their influence all the way to bands like Lush and so on, into the kind of maybe into dream pop and almost sort of shoegazy music that comes later. But Cocteau Twins to me are pretty unique, and this is a nice mid-80s example of their work. Okay. And now for something completely different. I love this guy. What an awesomely talented dude is John Cale. I recently started to pick up some of his albums from around the 80s, including this one from 84. This is Caribbean Sunset, which I hadn't heard of at all. I hadn't heard it until recently. Picked it up in a local record shop, quite cheap, and I've enjoyed it. I'll just show you the song list here. The tales of the recording of this album are really interesting to read. And quite enjoyed reading about the recording process. So there's kind of comments from the sound engineers and some of the backing band about how they would do quite good work in the studio, but the mood would change. I think part of that, unfortunately, is a bit kind of drug enhanced. So the mood would change quite dramatically. The place would get locked down, tapes wiped, all that kind of stuff. So I think it was quite a tempestuous period in John Cale's life. Certainly the recording of Caribbean Sunset, or the sort of testimony from some of the other guys involved would confirm that. You've got Brian Eno's fingerprints on it, which I always enjoy. And I really love John Cale. I think he's such an interesting, hugely influential artist. So I do like the album. Songs like Praetorian Underground, really good. The title track, Caribbean Sunset, quite upbeat. But yeah, just classic Cale. You kind of enjoy. I'll pick up anything I can find from him in this kind of mid-80s period, which I think was a bit of a tough one for him. Is interesting to listen to. So that's John Cale's Caribbean Sunset. Now I think this is the Paisley Underground, an area that I'm not that familiar with, but I really like this, by the Rain Parade. This is Explosions in the Glass Palace. So only Rain Parade work that I've got so far, but I definitely look to get more. So it's an EP. It's got 5 songs on it, really great. Kind of nods back to the 60s. Actually reminds me of bands like Brian Jonestown Massacre. Obviously they're about to kind of start to come down the line, but it's got that, nods to the 60s, nods to guys like the Velvet Underground and so on. A really cool listen, sort of droned out, blissed out at times. I think I don't know that much about the Rain Parade, and I know there's loads out in the VC that could say a lot more, but I love the cover, I love the artwork of it. You get the idea from that what you're going to get here. As I said, they could come straight out of kind of 1968 or something like that. But I believe what had happened is their main guy had left just before this was released. I also believe this one's a wee bit darker than their previous release. I like it a lot. Tracks like Broken Horse, and you can see I paid 13 quid I think for that. Broken Horse and that last one particularly good. No Easy Way Down. There's loads of modern, I guess they're neo-psych bands that are producing work very like Rain Parade, so I will certainly hope to check out a bit more of them. Rain Parade. Now, we'll go next. I'm going to go quintessential. Is this the most quintessential UK indie band ever? Possibly. Tell me what you think in the comments, but this is the debut album by the Smiths. And the reason I said, is this the most kind of quintessential indie band, is it's just because how influential they are, aren't they? So they come in the scene, brilliant debut, like the kind of classically fully formed debut band. You think, okay, there's lots of bits and pieces out there before the Smiths that sound a wee bit like what they are and what they become, but they really come out the blocks as the Smiths in terms of their identity. And what I like is their opening track, Reel Around the Fountain. I don't think that's like a kind of typical side A track 1 tune. I just think there's a confidence through all of their songs that it's just there right from the very beginning, everything that they do. There's a real blend of kind of musical style going on. The pacing it changes. You can tell that these guys can do pretty much anything they want, and as a 4-piece, yeah, there's a lot of bands out there you could probably talk about as, you know, it's a 4-piece and every single piece is completely essential and they're doing their bit, but look at that lineup. I just think it is kind of perfect. I don't think it's my favourite Smiths album, certainly. I maybe prefer some of the stuff that comes later on, but they certainly massively influential, of course, in all of their albums, their 12 inches, all the rest of it. So it's all great listening. Hand in Glove, maybe, tunes like that, Hand That Rocks the Cradle. But there's so many great bits of work there. So yeah, had to show that one off, the Smiths' debut album. At the same time that was coming out, you've got bands like, where am I? Upside Down. Depeche Mode. Very different sound. I like this sound. It's a kind of sound that I don't have an awful lot of in my collection. Again, stories about how they came up with it. So it's metallic, the percussion, much more kind of industrial sounding. I like the electronics of it. It's a catchy tune. People Are People is the main song here. It's a 12-inch. This is the only Depeche Mode I've got, and I'd love someone to maybe recommend me a little bit more. Not a band that I know anything much about. Picked it up in I think a bit of a job lot a while ago and really like it. And I guess what's interesting to me is if you put it in the context of 1984, I don't know how much out there is like this. It's got a nice dark heaviness about it. I love the industrial tinged percussion. I read about kind of weird and wonderful things that were getting battered and bashed in the studio to create the sound, but it's a upbeat, catchy tune. So Depeche Mode, there's an interesting instrumental on this. It's a nice 12-inch. I thought I would show it off because it's a bit different. As I say, I don't have any Depeche Mode, and this is what they were up to in 1984. And I'm going to finish off with an album that, here you go, I've just got it through the post, picked up a few days ago. It's R.E.M's second album, Reckoning, and I'm going to say thank you to Married to Vinyl. You've sent me down a rabbit hole of R.E.M. that I'm very much enjoying actually checking out. So I didn't know much about R.E.M's sort of back catalogue. For me, R.E.M. sort of started around about Out of Time. Know that album really well, obviously all that Automatic for the People and everything that comes later on, but I didn't know very much about their early 80s output at all until I picked up Murmur and absolutely loved it. So Murmur, their debut was released in 83. Here comes the follow-up, Reckoning. It's on IRS Records, so their first 5 albums are all on that record label, and I've gone down a wee bit of a rabbit hole to explore them. What a band, I love it. This is another brilliant album. It's got that jangly southern gothic energy. Michael Stipe's singing, it's kind of half mumbled. I don't mind that. It's a bit mysterious. There's a few masterpiece tunes on this. I think it's a brilliant follow-up to Murmur. At this point in time, I've not listened to it as much, so I haven't got a favourite, but I do love what they were up to in the early 80s, and I'm following that trajectory with great interest. So this came out in 84 as well, and it's a brilliant album that I'm not sure quite how much it came to the public attention back then, but they evolved all through the 80s into the band in 1989 when they released, was it Green? And then they're just about to go massive with their next release after that. So I love the early R.E.M. Thank you to Married to Vinyl for kind of drawing attention to them. So that's me. That's 1984, the year of Carl Lewis, a miners' strike. I'm fighting He-Man against Skeletor. For some reason I always wanted Skeletor to win. Don't know what that says. It's a great year in music, I would say. A lot of those albums are kind of coming in from the margins, while the mainstream's celebrating a lot of massive pop albums and things like Lionel Richie and so on. So that's me. Take a breath there. I feel like I rattled through that quite quickly. Hope you enjoyed watching it. In the comments, I'd love you to share some of your own favourites from that particular year, or if you've got any more info around the bands I showed. I'd love to know a wee bit more about the likes of Rain Parade, your take on John Cale, your thoughts on Depeche Mode and so on. But overall though, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you at some point with some more deep diving through the 80s. In the meantime, cheers, thank you for watching, bye.